Misinformation can be harmful. Hello, house guests. Welcome to House of Chatter Coffee Table Talk. And today, you've guessed it, President Donald Trump had a press conference on Tylenol and autism, and we are here to talk about it. It is such a big social media conversation that everybody's having, and it's very, well, to me, it hits close to home, and to a lot of others, it hits close to home as well. So we're going to be talking a little bit about the history of autism, the history of Tylenol, and some of the things or the misinformation potentially that President Donald Trump had mentioned. Okay, so President Donald Trump recommended today that pregnant women do not take Tylenol because it may cause autism. So let's go over the history of autism, because autism has been around for a while, a lot longer than Tylenol has. So autism was first studied or first discussed in 1911. It was actually used as a symptom that was being described in the schizophrenia illness. Okay, so in 1920 to the 1930s, children with schizophrenia and other illnesses were getting this autism label for mental health symptoms. In 1930s, a gentleman named Hans Asperger had a school in Vienna where he taught autistic children. And his point of view was that it was a polygenetic disability, which differed from the thinking that would be later published in the 1940s. Come the 1940s, someone else was researching autism and had their own thoughts. This person, Leo Kanner, wrote a paper on his observations of 11 children who had early infantile autism. Okay, their symptoms included ignoring parents and having panic over little things, like having objects moved without them knowing. So if you moved an object, they would just not have it. Kind of like if you moved my son's object, he's not going to have a good day. It needs to be there, and it needs to be right where it is. You cannot move it unless he moves it. I have a son that is on the spectrum, and yes, I did delay my vaccines. I still have a son that's on the spectrum. I love him. There's nothing that I can do. That is it. So let's keep on going as I went on my ADD tangent like I always do. So 1994, this study was published. It wasn't until a year later that Hans Asperger also published his own research article, but it had to be translated, and it didn't get translated to a little bit later. When it came to the 1950s, Leo Kanner was the guy to go to figure out if you had autism, and he had developed his own technique and his own testing and diagnostic criteria. However, his diagnostic criteria would later be too exclusive because he was excluding children with seizures, and some autistic children had seizures, and his diagnostic criteria was just a little bit too exclusive. So listen to this. If you have an exclusive study, you're going to have less of a pool of people to study. Okay, if you have an inclusive, you have a bigger pool of people to study. So his pool of study was quite smaller than what it would later be. Okay, and by the 1950s, everybody was sending him referrals all around the world, even places like South Africa. And Leo had this theory. He believed that autism was from the parents, specifically the mom. It was the refrigerator mom. Okay, because she was cold and distant and was not affectionate to her child. So that's kind of harmful and hurtful against, the mom who's just trying to do her best. And the majority of these women had held roles and professions outside of the home. And this was kind of a way that was used to kind of shame them. And around this time, these children with these characteristics were being institutionalized. So they weren't walking around, going to school and all that stuff. They were basically sent away, which is kind of like what the U.S. model in the mid-1950s, early 1900s was, right? I mean, you get pregnant, you kind of got sent away, and then you came back whenever. Things like that happened back in the day, according to my mother, who was born in the 1940s. So as I digress, let's get back to this timeline, okay? So we blame them on the 1950s, okay? And this is where I'm going to go into some of the stats a little bit. In the 1960s, it was estimated that between 2 and 4 out of 10,000 children had autism. We get to 1970, that number is pretty much the same, along with 1980. So 1970, Leo's model was relooked at, and it was kind of retooled to expand, okay? In 1978, a new definition of autism came out. In 1980s, autism was added to the DSM. The DSM is what medical professionals use to diagnose. It's like an encyclopedia for diseases. Example, you have pneumonia, and then you would have this symptom, blah, 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 and it describes everything. So it's like an encyclopedia, basically, for healthcare professionals and diagnosing. In 1993, and this is where the prevalence is going to come in. So 1970s, we have better testing that's not so exclusive. So now we're including more people into our sample. So we're having a bigger pool of people to test and observe. So then we're going to pick up on more things, because before we were excluding people with seizures. Well, now we're including people with seizures. And those just happen to be autistic. So we're adding to the pool instead of taking out of the pool. 1993, CDC updates on autism and their definitions and the criteria and all that other stuff and their diagnostics. There is more diagnostics, more information available now. And I don't know if I said this before, but in healthcare, we are generally 10 to 20 years behind the research. So I can guarantee you, whatever was studied 20 years ago, we are trying to implement today in our healthcare system. We are just very slow, and information does not run as fast as we would like, kind of like on social media. 1993, WHO also updates their criterion and their DSM on autism, and it's published in 1994. Another thing to note is in 1980, the movie Rain Man came out, and that person was autistic, and that brought a lot of national attention and more of a focus on it. And so where it allowed more of a space to speak up about what was happening, what you're experiencing. Now, what has happened since then as far as vaccines? Well, we had that British pharmacist who said, "Hey, vaccines cause autism." He was being paid by another vaccine company to do research. He kind of skewed his results a little bit. And then all of a sudden, he had this research that was very biased. He used it to sue other pharmaceutical companies, but he was found out to be not true. But as he was doing this, it got out that, hey, this stigma, vaccines cause autism. If that were true, we would have seen a rise of autism in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. Why is it the 1990s is where we're experiencing all its prevalence? Well, it's because the world and the U.S. changed it, and it was just more publicized. The world was getting on this mission. It was also stated that autism is not rare. It may be in the first half of the century where there was exclusive criterion in this, but because we're inclusive now, we're seeing a lot bigger of a spectrum, okay? We have high functioning and then we have low functioning. And it is a big spectrum. Okay, it can be the difference between being functional in society to being debilitated in society. All right, so that brings us to the 1990s, and then we go further in 2005, where we have milestone developmental checklists going on, and we're a lot more focused on child development and things like that. Okay, so that's the history on autism. Now, where does the Tylenol come in? Tylenol, or acetaminophen that the president couldn't say, was first synthesized in 1878. So, it's been around since 1878. We have been consuming it since 1878. Why? It doesn't make sense. We're using this drug. Okay. 1893, acetaminophen is being used for fever and pain treatment. All right. We should still be seeing higher numbers if we're using this drug. In 1949, the people who were making acetaminophen were using it as an alternative to aspirin. Why? Because you can't give aspirin to a child who's had a fever, because you raise your risk of Stevens-Johnson syndrome, which is a full body rash, and you don't want to go through it. Aspirin was causing it. This company said, hey, this is an alternative, it's safer, and we're driving up more people using Tylenol or acetaminophen, right? The numbers do not change. This is 1949. The numbers still stay the same in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, right? So, in 1955, they make an elixir for children. We should still see rising because we're taking this medication, right? That supposedly does it. 1959, this company gets bought out by Johnson & Johnson. We all know who Johnson & Johnson is. And then in 1960s, they do some formulations for adults and other things. So at least by the 1960s and 70s, we should have technically had a rise in numbers if this drug is coming out to the market. Now, in the 1980s, I believe that's when Tylenol was famous for the incidents with the fatal doses and tampering and everything like that, which I'm sure had a huge impact on the sales. But still, the theory still goes, we should have seen a bump or something during this time. So that's where the prevalence comes in, Tylenol. Now, I'm going to go back to kind of some of the remarks that President Trump had said, and that I feel like as a healthcare person and a U.S. voter that I should at least address. He mentioned Cuba. He said Cuba does not have Tylenol and there's no incidence of autism. That is incorrect. There's still an incidence of autism in Cuba. However, acetaminophen is not called acetaminophen or Tylenol. It's actually called, and I'm going to butcher this name, paracetamol. Okay, and you can only get it by prescription in Cuba. Okay. President Trump mentioned that California has a higher incidence of autism. Simply not true. Now, when we take a look at autism rates around the world, there are a couple of countries that have a lower incidence of autism. That being France and Portugal, as well as the country of Asia. But that may be because they're using different diagnostic approaches. Okay. Also, I do have to circle back to Cuba. I did try to do a little study on Cuba to find if there was something that they were referring to, or something out of a research article that maybe they caught like a little sentence and they just blew it up. So I did actually find something on Cuba with Tylenol use and autism, but that was related to Tylenol and Roundup causing concerns. And historically, Roundup and other pesticides does cause birth defects in pregnant women who are exposed to fertilizer or pesticides early in pregnancy. Okay, a lot of it has to do with neurodevelopment. You know, I think it was in South America. They did a study on women who are working in fields and pesticides, and all of their children were being born without brains. Well, that's because they were being exposed to this highly toxic chemical. So is it really the Tylenol, or is it really the Roundup, or, the generic name of Roundup in that study? We don't know, but I kind of feel like maybe he cherry picked that a little bit. California, I couldn't find anything on that. He also mentioned the Amish population, and that the Amish population does not take Tylenol, and they do not have an incidence of autism. That is really incorrect. There was a study that was done in 2010 where they took a sample of 1,900 children, and it was found that 1 in 271 cases, there was a case of autism. So the Amish community having a lack of autism, it's simply not true. Now we get to the MMR vaccine, measles, mumps, and rubella. Typically, those are 3 different vaccines into one. Why is there a concern with the multi-dose, multi-vaccine, quadrivalent vaccines? Well, this goes back to Wakefield and his theories about the mercury, the thimerosal, or whatever. Why do we want them separate? Because mercury, aluminum, and thimerosal is not used in single-dose vaccines. It's normally used as a preservative in I call it multi-dose, but really and my brain is a little bit jumbled, but it just means that it's not multi-dose, like I'm giving a lot of doses out of the same vial. There's like 2, 3, or 4 viruses in that vaccine that they're going to be exposing you to. And the way that a vaccine works is you are either given a dead virus or a piece of a dead virus where the particulates set off your immune system but do not hurt you, and your immune system is triggered to identify this vaccine or particulate or virus particle, and they attack it, and then they put it in the back of their mind, and then you have a memory of the immunity of what you want to be immune to, so that if you get exposed to it again, it's not that you're going to be immune and you're not going to get it. You're going to get less of a severity, if at all, because your immune system is attacking it and suppressing it, or it's attacking it and keeping the viral load so low that it's not making you extremely sick. Okay, that's how vaccines work. It's either live virus that is very, very weakened and can't hurt you, or it's a dead virus and they just chop it all up and give it to you. How did vaccines work in the ancient days? Well, with smallpox, the Chinese would pick the smallpox scabs and eat them so that they are exposed to the virus. Their immune system can see it, memorize it, no effect, and that's how we do it. Now, do I want to go back to the days where I'm picking off scabs of people with smallpox and eating it to get immunized? I'm getting the jab. I've had the smallpox shot. I'll get the jab. I don't want to eat your scabs because that's grossing me out. So that's the when he says he wants to separate them, it's because he doesn't want you to be at the risk of the thimerosal or the mercury, but they don't use these components anymore. They haven't used mercury in vaccines since 2000, and they've been slowly getting rid of the thimerosal. So that's not even an active component in a lot of your vaccines anyways. So again, talk to your doctor. They can tell you what is best for you and your body. They went to medical school. They learned this crap, and they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars learning this. I'm going to leave it to them. Okay, so mercury was removed in 2000, so we don't need to worry about that. Aluminum, same deal. Limited clinical trials. He was correct about that. There is limited clinical trials. What they actually did was they took 46 published articles and they reviewed them. They didn't start any new research. They just picked up they found articles and they viewed them. I don't have that list of articles. I wish I did because I could view them. It'd be interesting to see. But when you just do a Google Scholar on autism and Tylenol, there are some correlations, but it doesn't mean there's causations. It just leaves it open to, hey, we need to study this more. So we're still going through it, and I still have one more thing to add because we're still going to talk about that medication, but let me get through this. Tough it out. He says, yeah, if you're pregnant and you have a fever, just tough it out. Go with it. If you're in your first trimester and you have a fever, call your doctor, because having a fever and being pregnant, especially in your first trimester, and if it's a high fever, that needs to be addressed immediately because it could cause birth defects, either in their neural tube. You're also risking stillbirth and miscarriages when you do that. So please talk to your doctor, because if you have a fever that you're not treating, you might have an infection that needs to be taken care of. So talk to your doctor. Now, the medication that they were talking about, the Leukoven, that is a vitamin. It's folate. It has been used with chemotherapy. The press conference was right about that. Why they want to use it in autism is because there has been some autistic children who have a folate deficiency. What is a folate deficiency that they're talking about? It's a specific folate deficiency, and it's called cerebral folate deficiency, where there's low levels of vitamin B in your cerebral spinal fluid, because you need vitamins going everywhere. It's a lower level, and this can actually cause developmental delays, seizures, and autistic features in children if you have this. How do you get it? It's not acquired. It's genetic. Okay, so if you have this, it's a genetic component. It's not caused by vaccines. It's just caused by your genes. Okay, there's a specific gene that does it. Also, you can have what's called an autoimmune disease, and that also could be genetic. So there is definitely a case for genetics in this. Okay, so the Leukoven provides you folate through, gets it up to the blood-brain barrier, all that stuff. And it's supposed to help with communication. Studies are still out on that. There's not a lot of research. It's not currently approved by the FDA. Doctors may use it off-label, but there's still so much research that needs to be done that we just don't know. And it's not universally used in autism either. So the question is, do all autistic children have this deficiency? No, they do not. Some of them have it, some of them don't. So this drug is going to work for some people and it's not going to work for others. Well, how is this drug going to get paid? So check this out. Government says that they're going to use this new drug and they're going to cover it. It is estimated, and let me get this number for you. It is estimated that 48% of children are on Medicaid, meaning their parents do not make enough money to get insurance. They're poor, and the government needs to give them healthcare insurance. So the government is paying for them. Okay, 48%. That's insane. 48% of children. That's insane. That's millions of children. And there's also another program. It's not just the Medicaid program. There's also a separate program, and it's called I believe it's called the Children's Health Program, or they call it CHIPS. This can be used for foster children, children that can't afford insurance. This is just another bucket for them. And that's 8 to 10%. So we're talking 58% of America's children are on government assistance insurance, and this drug will be covered. That's great, honestly. However, there is a concern that Trump's big, beautiful bill, who is cutting $1 trillion off of everything, that we're not going to have the funds to pay for it. Donald Trump says we're just targeting the people that do the waste, fraud, and abuse. My answer is you're not going after the right people. The physicians are the people who bill. They take those codes for your diagnoses. Excuse me. They take those codes for the work that they performed, either a biopsy, a scrape, or whatever, debridement, And that's a code. So how do you fluff up and create Medicare fraud? You add procedures that you did not do to the bill and you send it in. And nobody's none the wiser because nobody reads their bills. But no one's going after the physicians or questioning these medical things. They're going after the other people and they're cutting it. And when you cut funds from Medicare, you cut funds from everybody. So I'm not in a red state, and in a state where I thought we were doing really economically well. However, our hospitals here are definitely not, and I'm not in a rural area. Our hospitals are being kept open by private donations. They're not being kept open because of Medicare or Medicaid. In fact, jobs are being lost because they're cutting Medicare and Medicaid because hospitals won't have that revenue anymore. Hospitals won't have that revenue. I don't know how we're going to pay for this drug, but I hope we pay for it because it at least would help some people with their communication problems. I just don't know how that's going to work. So, and like the president said, there's no downside to not taking Tylenol. I totally disagree. If you're pregnant, please call your doctor. If you cannot call your doctor, look in the back of your insurance card and there's a phone number back there. That phone number you can call and you can get nurse advice and they can advise you over the phone of what to do. Please have a very strong relationship with your provider when you're making medical decisions like what drug to take, like Tylenol or even ivermectin, because I know there's a big push on ivermectin now. I highly would recommend you do not take that unless you talk to your healthcare professional, because that could be deadly. But that is what I have for autism and Tylenol. One more big thing that I do have to debunk that President Trump did say before I end this. Temperatures of 106, 107, 108 are fatal. They're not okay. You cannot tough it out. Please do not listen to that advice. That is wrong advice. I can tell you that. If you have a temperature of 106, 107, 108, you are risking not only organ damage, but brain damage. You cannot take a drug at this time. Do not try to put yourself in hot ice water or whatever if you have these high temperatures. If you have these high temperatures and you're still coherent, take yourself straight to the emergency room, okay? Because you're going to cook your brain. Other than that, I didn't have any other debunks other than the hepatitis B. President Trump says you can only get, hepatitis B through sex. Look, hepatitis B is a blood-borne pathogen. You can get it through sex. You can get it through mother through baby, and you can get it through blood. Needle sticks, it's common. It's why all healthcare workers need to be tested for Hep B. So if you're pregnant and you have Hep B, you can pass it on to your baby. And then your baby will have Hep B. So take that into consideration. Like JFK said, Jr. said, he doesn't see 70-year-old men with autism. Well, right now, they're probably all in nursing homes or institutionalized. And his theory is simply not true. So please have a really good relationship with your doctor. Take everything with a grain of salt. Not everything on TV that they say is true nowadays, especially on social media. Thanks, house guests. That was my spew for the day. Thank you for coming to Coffee Table Talk, and we'll see you next time for social media's hottest headlines. That's it. Have a great day. Comment, subscribe, and we'll see you next time.